Hello everyone, my name is Paul Giancarlo, and today I will guide you through the process of creating this epic battle scene. From creating USD assets in Maya to amazing rendered output in Arnold, with fast, Bifrost procedurals, workflows and matching in between. We're going to construct this epic robotic battle sequence from scratch, and we're going to unleash the powerful Maya USD Bifrost and Arnold workflow. So without further ado, let's get started. In this very first section, I would like to show you how quickly I can start assembling my scene with the help of Quixel and Quixel's bridge. As you might see, I have Quixel open on the right and I have Maya on the left on my screen. So I've downloaded a few assets which already in my local folder. So you can see there's a few of them here in order to populate that desert. So all I need to do from Bridge Quixel is just go into here and click export. As I have the Bridge plugin installed inside of Maya, it will load it in automatically. So let's go ahead and click export. You can see the message exporting to Maya. Once that asset is exported to Maya, you can see it populate right in the viewport. The good thing about Quixel is that I can see textures in the screen. So because it brings all of the texture information and the shading information into Maya. It also gives me a proper naming convention and it tells me what type of LOD I have. So in this case, I have a dense mesh. Also, if you go to the attribute editor, you might be able to see that it also contains the surface information, the material information already in it. So you can see I have color information, I have specular information, and all of the things that I need to make this look good. Now, all I need to do is bring all of the rest of my assets into Maya and start doing my assembly, as I would regularly do. Now I'm going to speed up the process and I'm going to bring the rest of my stuff and you're going to see me working very fast. Alright, so welcome back. I'm finished adding all of the geometries from Quixel and I have something that I'm quite happy with. So I put all this stuff into Maya manually and it's time for me to kind of automate some other processes like adding patches of grass to the terrain. So what I want to do is want to take this piece of land and I want to populate it with this piece of grass. So as simple as that. So I'm going to make sure that it's at a ground level and I'm going to freeze transformations. And I'm going to open now the Bifrost graph. So I'm going to create a new Bifrost graph shape and I'm going to add my ground main into here and the grass patch into here. So this is done by clicking and holding the middle mouse button. So now what I want to do is to create a scatter points node and I want to connect the ground main shape into the geometry, as this is going to tell Maya exactly where those points live, and it's going to scatter whatever object I want around in the way that this node decides it needs to be done. So now what I want to do as well is to create a create instance node. As we see, I have it in the recent ones, so Maya will find it and Bifrost will find it pretty quick. So next is to connect the mesh 1 into the instance geometries, and I also want to now then connect the points from the scatter node to the points of the create instance. Final step in order to see here would be to connect to an output. Now as you might see, I start to see a lot of grass patches here. What I can do now is to take this and maybe add 10,000 of them, a little bit more. So next step now, it could be to add some random rotations, but I could, instead of use the scatter settings, instead of the scatter mode, instead of using random, I might want to use blue noise, which gives me something a little bit nicer. So next step would be to add, for me, a randomized point rotation. So that's going to be connected between the scatter node and the create instance node. Now that I have this, I need to go back into my point rotations, and I want to maybe change some of these parameters here. So I'm going to set them all back to 0, same as here, and same here. Okay, so now I have my patches of grass looking to different directions. Okay, so now I have these patches of grass laid out in my ground. In order for me to be able to export this as a USD file, I need to convert this into Maya geometry. But in order for that to work, I need to add an extra node here in between the instances and the output. So I'm going to disconnect here, and I'm going to create a bake instance geometry node. Now I'm going to connect the instances to the instances and the merge meshes into the instances output that I created before. Okay, so that's done now. As you see now, Maya is struggling a little bit to work with this, but that's no problem. We can go into the node editor now, and we're gonna find the Bifrost graph shape here in the outliner, and we're gonna source it into the node editor. Once I have that, I want to expand by clicking Alt plus left mouse click, and you'll see I have the instances output. What I can do in order to find it a little bit better is to rename the port, and I'm going to call them plants or grass or whatever. So now I have this. I see I can find them quickly on top of the Bifrost graph shape 1. I can then now type click on tab on my keyboard and find a Bifrost Geo to Maya node. So now what I want to do is connect plants into the Bifrost geometry. So next step will be to connect then a new node, which will be a mesh node. And this is what going to give you this polysurface output, as you might see here. So what I want to do now is go into the Maya mesh and connect the mesh 0 into the in mesh. Okay, so now that I have compared all my my grass into a Maya surface, now I can basically just rename this as grass geo, and now I'm ready for me to start exporting this set into a USD file. So let's get started with the USD part. Okay, so before we start exporting this as USD data, I wanted to bring just this one sample here and show you some of the limitations that we have at the moment with USD. So what I'm going to do is just going to take this particular stone, and I'm going to do the typical, which will be to export the selection as USD. As you might see, we have Arnold USD and the USD export. And if you go down to some of the options, you will see by default you get is a USD preview surface. So first I'm going to export this as a USD preview surface, and I'm going to save it here in my USD test area. So I'm going to call that stone. I'm going to call preview material. You're going to save that. Right, now I'm going to export it again, export the selection, but this time I'm going to use the Arnold shaders, which makes sense. That will tell you that you're going to export all the material shaders with Arnold, and it should probably render fine inside of Maya. So I'm going to do this, and stone preview, instead of preview, you're going to call these Arnold material, and I export that. Finally, I'm going to export that again, but this time around I don't gonna care about any of this stuff. I'm just gonna change the file type to Arnold USD. So this is going to do, this is going to take care of all the Arnold information that is needed to render inside of Maya and Arnold. So I'm going to export that, and I'm going to call this stone USD Arnold material. I'm going to export that again. All right. So now that I've exported these three objects, what I want to do now is to bring it in. There's two ways of importing them back. You can import them directly from the import menu, and basically whenever you do this, it's going to import it as the same hierarchy. So that's not really what we want to do. What we want to do is to create a stage from file. So in this case, I'm going to do stage from file, and I'm going to go find my first preview material. Okay, you see that loaded pretty quick, and I'm gonna move it away, and what that gives me is just a preview of that particular material over there. Next, I'm gonna again stage from file, and this time I'm gonna bring the Arnold material, the one that I selected the Arnold material. As you might see, it does not bring any of the texture to the viewport, does not show any of the texture to the viewer. So if I expand this, you will see inside of the USD file, all of the texture information lives here, but somewhat, for some reason, it does not show in the viewport, and it won't render either. So just for demonstration's sake, let me add a Skydome light pretty quickly, and I'm just gonna hit render. As you see here, I see the geometry, but I don't really get any texture information. So what I want to do now, and I'm gonna bring in stage from file, but this time the Arnold USD export. So I'm gonna create, this one does not have textures in, it does not represent any of the textures, unfortunately. But if I hit render, you will see I do get all the relevant texture and information that I was missing before. So an exact replica of the original Maya file in Arnold USD format. So the reason for this is that the Maya USD menu exports the Maya scene to USD, including the whole X form, hierarchy, and the whole sequence. But as now, it won't export the Arnold data yet. So the team is planning to extend the Maya USD export so that the Arnold data is exported as well. But when this will be done, the Maya USD export should have everything you need. But for the meantime, you will have to export it in this way. Okay, next step before we proceed now to start exporting every single piece of this environment as USD, what I want to do is to optimize the scene a little better. So what I've done is to basically group and separate all of the elements on the different groups. So I have environment candidate GRP, which stands for group. If I expand this, and let me actually just expand like that, you'll see I have all of the rocks and plants in one group, large canyons in another group, rocks in another group, and I have lights in another group, in the grounds in another group. Then I have loosed what I want to do is a variant later on, which is going to be this here standalone rock, right? So if I isolate that, you see it's got a particular shape. And then I have the variant, second variant, which is this one here. Okay, so moving on. In order for me to simplify the scene or the way I'm going to be loading this as a stage in USD, I want to take first all the large canyons, and I'm going to take all of them pieces of geometry, and I'm going to combine them into just one, because I know they're not going to be moving at any point in the stage throughout the production. So now that I have done that, I can just go ahead and delete by type history And now I just left with nothing under that group. So I'm going to take the large and I'm going to put it in there under the group, which is pretty much just one shape. So I'm going to do the same with the rest of the objects. Alright, now I have completed merging and grouping all of the objects. I'm going to proceed to start exporting these as USD file, and particularly Arnold USD. So I'm basically just going to grab the main group, so the top, as you might see here, and I'm going to go to Arnold, scene export, export selection to USD. This is going to be canyon underscore large canyons, yes, and we're going to export the selection. So now I'm going to repeat steps with all of the groups, as you might see, and then we're going to proceed to import all of them back into new scene as a USD stage. So as I mentioned before, there's two ways of importing Arnold USD data into Maya. So we can either do through an standing. So if I load in standing, see I have a canyon environment stage USD. One thing that I did before is that I took all of the groups and I exported them all at once or just one USD file. But I also have all of the others separated in different groups. So in case I want to do loop development, I can always come back and bring it in, do my Arnold development, and continue to work. So when I load an Arnold through Arnold, all I get is a bounding box. I can also see shaded, but you see the representation is not great at the moment in the viewport. I can also adjust a little bit here, the near clip plane and the far clip plane, to see a little bit better. But the representation anyways is not the best. But if I go into the standing here that I've created, I can go to the file contents, so you see that I have pretty much all the file contents in here. Which thing about this workflow is that then once I have this stuff in memory, so I can take any of the objects here and I can start assigning different, for example, shaders or different operators, like so. So that's the good thing about this. So if you're working on loop development, this is probably the best way. You want to do it asset per asset, like bring in separately all of the objects. So now getting that out of the way, best way to bring in this, because I want to take advantage of the layer system instead of USD, I'm going to bring it in as a stage from files. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring the stage, and you see that loads a lot quicker, and the representation is much better in the viewport. Now, please allow me to waste 1 minute of your time so I can demonstrate the difference between loading a Maya file and a USD file. So I'm just going to load this speed test, or this scene that contains all the Maya information, and see how long it takes to load. Okay, that's a minute. Maya still loading. So now let's bring that USD stage. Boom, voila. That was that fast. I didn't have a character loaded here in this particular scene. So see how fast and responsive Maya is. It's kind of a preview of what is to come in future versions of Maya USD and Arnold USD. So another thing that I want to do now is to maybe expand this and have a look at what I have here. So I see I have all of my data, there's shading data, I have a lot of information, I have all the groups that I had inside with different geometries, like in this case ground, for example, or my hero rocks over here. You see all that information is being grouped in the same way. It just looks a little bit different here. But what I can do now is just pretty much just create, just right click and go to the USD layer editor. What you want to do at this point is to start adding layers. So I want to edit the content of this file, right? So let's say we're gonna do some changes or variations in this. So first things first, I'm gonna create one layer and then I'm gonna create a sublayer. And this could have tons and tons of different things, right? So but in this case, I'm just gonna be doing layout in this particular case. This is what I'm gonna save, so I'm not gonna create any more layers or any of that, so just layout. So good. So what I want to do now, I just want to save the layer edit. So if I click on this icon over here, it gives me the ability to save the stage, right? So to save this particular layer. So what I want to do is I'm going to rename this very first one. I'm going to call it sequence. And the second one, I'm gonna call it layout. I'm gonna save the stage. So what happens here now is now I can go into the layout layer, into the sequence. That could be any sequence, and I'm gonna click on that particular icon. So I'm gonna turn it on. So what I can do now is now I can navigate. So I can come here, for example, go into my outliner and right click here and say maybe I don't want this, maybe I want to make it invisible, right? So that's there. So I want to maybe do the same with this guy. Same story, go find it and I want to make it invisible. One last thing maybe that I want to do, maybe I want to take that particular rock, that hero rock, and I want to move it around. So let's go find the pivot is a little bit far away, so that's gonna be my mistake. So I'm gonna move it, I'm gonna place it right there by holding the D key and moving the pivot. So once that's there, now I can proceed, say, to maybe rotate the rock or maybe a little bit bigger. I can make these type of changes, right? So now that I have this done, Maya is telling me that I need to save those edits. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to click save. And it's going to tell me the stage one is following existing file will be overridden. Sequence, yes, you want to do it? Yes, save the stage, please. So what I have done here, so I haven't destroyed anything. In fact, all of the information still contains within the can exchange USD file. So if I disable the layer, I'll see all the edits are going back to the way they were, as you may see. So the very non-destructive way of creating scene edits and maybe having this scene to propagate across different shots, like shot, say per se shot 1 to 10. Maybe I don't want to have this, so I can then, you know, disable that particular layer or load a different layer with different edits. Next step for me is going to be to now get the animated character exported as USD data and bring it back in. Okay, so I have opened the robot animation. By the way, this animation and this model was purchased in TurboSquid. I will put the credits here. And basically what I have is very nice articulated animation of this robot. But this very interesting case that I want to show to you now is the fact that the bone hierarchy. It's not your average where you have a main joint and then you have a hierarchy to follow. This is not the case in this particular robot. So if I wanted to export it as USD and include that animation, I would have to do a little bit of a workaround. So, let me demonstrate that. So I'm gonna take that robot. Okay, so what I want to do now is just want to export this, right? And I want to export it as again as Arnold USD. But if I scroll down, it gives me the option to include sequence. So now let's do that. If I export this selection now as an Arnold USD, I'm gonna create a folder here. I'm gonna call it robot underscore ANN, and I'm gonna save this as robot underscore ANN. I'm gonna export the selection. So you may see it first convert the textures, and then it's going to export frame by frame, and it's going to generate a USD sequence of files. Okay, now that I exported that as an Arnold USD sequence, I want to show you what the result is. As you might see, I have loads and loads of USD files. What I want to do now is I want to take the robot and I want to cache it as an Alembic. So I'm going to export that selection to Alembic. I'm going to make sure that I UV write the thing, because it's going to lose all the shading information, and I'm going to export that selection. So now I can go back to my webinar and let's look for cache data. I'm going to save it here in data. I'm going to create an ABC folder, and I'm going to save that as a robot underscore animation, and I export that selection now. So I don't want to delete this guy because I still have some textures and things that I want to keep. So next step for this guy is going to be to I'm going to go to the cache menu, and I'm going to import that Alembic file back. So I'm going to go to data, where I saved it before, ABC robot animation.abc. Okay, so now I have it back into my file. I can hide the original one. What I want to do now, I just exported as Alembic file and re-imported it, or cached it as an Alembic file and imported it back as an Alembic. But why I've done this, I'll explain in a minute. I just need to now go in File and export the selection, and this time around I'm going to do a regular USD export. And I'm going to make sure that I have the selection range, that they're all automatically created. So this skeleton and skin cluster are automatically created. And for this, I'm going to bother about the Arnold shaders. I'm just going to keep it as Arnold shaders for the moment, even though they're not going to comply with it. We can reapply the shaders later. So I'm just going to export this. I'm going to my USD, back to my USD data. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do as a copy, just so you see how fast that goes. Cool. Finally, I'm going to hide this guy, and I'm going to unhide the original one, and I'm going to again export this guy as a USD export. Same settings, same story, but this time I'm going to call it robot animation or original. Let's call it original. Okay, that's all great. So let's hide these two guys, and now I can create a stage from file, go outside, and let's pick first the original. Okay, the original doesn't seem to be there, so let's see what happens if you swap to GL Hydra. You see, now we start to see something. But the main issue here is that I'm not getting all of my geometry because of all that problem that I mentioned before. So the hierarchy wasn't good. It wasn't something that Maya or USD expert would not really understand or would know how to interpret. So that's why we exported it as an alembic and exported it back. So that's what I want to do now. I want to create again a stitch from file, but this time around I'm going to choose the robot animation that was exported with the alembic data. Okay, as you may see, the viewport 2.0 won't pick it up, but the GL Hydra would. So now that we have something that we can work as USD, we can proceed now and import these data into our environment. So back in my stage, I want to go into my layer editor, and what I want to do now is just go back to the top and want to create another layer, and for that layer, well, in this case I'm going to load a sub layer because I've already exported the animation of the robot with textures and everything. I'm just going to load that particular layer that I exported. So I'm going to just go and load this animation test textures that I have, and I'm going to click load. Then I'm just going to click on load sublayers. As you may see, that guide appears over here. At this time, these anonymous layers only exist in memory, so I need to actually save them. So I'm going to click there, and then for the very first anonymous layer, I'm going to call that shot, and I'm going to save the stage. Now I can start editing this particular layer, robot 2, because I have fixed the translations that cannot be moved, but I can for certain do rotations. So now that you have seen how to bring in a sub layer, or how to load a sub layer for animation into the layer editor, I'm just going to proceed now and create a whole bunch of USD robots, and I'm going to populate this using now Mesh in this case, just to do something different. I'm going to be using Mesh, so without further ado, let's go and create that battle of robots. Okay, so finally in this section, I'm going to show you how to populate this ground with tons and tons of robots. So what I've done for this particular scene is I just imported the Canyon environment stage, the USD stage, and I created a ground shape here, right? So I'm just gonna have the robots to populate on this area. I don't want it to collide, or I don't want it to grow where this stuff is. So I'm just going to keep deleting some parts, like this part, the back, for example, and this too. Okay, so you see what I mean, because they're going to be walking and I don't want them to basically walk through the walls. So for that reason, I'm just going to do it like this. So anyways, next step is going to be to bring in an Arnold standing. Remember before we exported the animation as an Arnold USD, and it created a long, very long sequence. So we did that after exporting the alembic file. So now when we bring in this standing as USD data, now we can have the animation turned on using the file sequence here, and we can also see the shaded model. So now if we go into here, you see we have the object, and the animation is applied to it. So that's all good and fine. So what I want to do now, or next step, is maybe I want to make this a little bit smaller, and doesn't really matter at this point where I place this particular robot. So next step is going to be to go into the Mesh network. and I'm going to create a mesh network, and I'm going to make sure that I use instancers. I'm going to apply and close, and by default normally it would hide the original standing, right? So this is the one here. So I want to unhide that, and you will see why. So now I'm going to go back to mesh, and on the distribute node I want to take the distribution type and change that to mesh. Now I'm going to grab my ground proxy, and I'm going to click on the middle mouse button, hold and drag, and release it on the input mesh. So now you will see this start to populate on that particular area. So now I can add more and more and more robots. I can have maybe 200 of them or 300 of them. And I can still preview that animation. Okay, so next step is going to be to animate the node. So what I can do is just to add a transform node, and I can fix the position so they don't cut through the ground. I can also change the rotation of them. So let's see in what direction they're walking. Okay, so pretty much towards the front, so something like so. And finally, it's just a case of animating all the robots in this particular direction, right? So that's what you want to do. This is a very simple setup. You can also do this with Bifrost and have the robots avoid certain areas. You can also add in these particular things follows, for example. On the distribute node, you can add follow, so it doesn't really distribute around certain areas. But for time's sake, I'm just going to leave it up to here, and I'm just going to continue with the lining part. Okay, so we have finally come to the last bit of the presentation, and now we're gonna basically go through the lightning setup. So what I've done for this is basically added a skydome light. So if you go to the Arnold menu, you know you can find the skydome light. So basically just create one. Then you can connect an HDR directly into that particular input. So I just connected one that I already have saved. And I've adjusted some of the parameters like the exposure and things like that. So next up, render settings. So if I go to the system tab, you will see that I have the render device set to GPU, and the Arnold render settings and the camera AA samples. I only have 2, but I have enabled the adaptive sampling, and I have the max camera AA sample set to 4. So, and for the common parameters only, for the common parameters, I've adjusted the image size to 1280 by 720. So now let's have a look at the Arnold render view. So this is the final result that I'm getting here. So let me explain a little bit what I've done. So I have, if you click on this particular icon, you will have access to post. So basically this gives you access to images, and you can add different types. So in this case, I've added a color correct, a tone map, exposure, lens effects, white balance, another color correct, another white balance, and then denoise optics. So that's what I did here. The good thing about this setup is now that I can start adjusting things. So if I hit play, because I've already loaded this scene into memory, all right. So now that is done, I can start adjusting color correction, for example. So I'm gonna add a little bit of gamma. So if you see, I've tweaked this already before. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of gamma here. and you see I get really quick response there. I'm also getting a denoise version of this, so if I disable the denoise optics, I have a much grainier image. So I'm just going to enable it back up, and you see a much cleaner image. So I can start now tweaking things like, for example, the tone map, which I already have a gamma added there, so I can add even more if I want, bring this up a little bit more, like so. I also have the exposure, so I can add a little bit more of exposure over there. You see, start tweaking my scene, make it a little bit more cinematic. I also have a lens effect that I've tweaked, that I added before, which is added to the effect. The white balance, I have changed the mode to luminant, and I've chosen overcast. So see what happens if I choose shade, for example. Maybe sun. See, daylight. So that's quite cool. So I kind of like sun because it adds a little bit of a bluish tone to it. So I can start tweaking again on the color correct, and I might want to add maybe a little bit of contrast or to the shadows. Yeah. Then I can adjust another white balance. See, I have set this one to temperature. I can add a little bit more of warm look, or I can tone it down to a much colder look, like you see there. That's a little bit too much, too over the top. But I can start adjusting, and keep adding until I'm happy with the result. Okay. So, good thing now is that I can start to manipulate this here. As you might see, I have 3D manipulation turned on, so I can start manipulating my scene inside of this Arnold render view, and I can basically pretty fast change camera view, so I can see a little bit of the sky maybe. And boom. So now I have a render image that I'm quite satisfied with, and I can pretty much send to render. So thank you very much, and now it's time for Q&A.